as a game developer, you really do, or rather, like an indie game developer, because that's different than just being a game developer who works for a company. As an indie game developer, you kind of have to be able to be good at delegating and good at bringing a lot of moving parts together. Because there's going to be times where you're going to need to purchase models or hire someone to design art, maybe even hire someone for marketing. And you bring up a good point about having a concept artist. It's like you think of any cartoon like The Simpsons. It's not one guy who's drawing. One guy came up with the vision for The Simpsons or Family Guy and how that particular world looks and how the characters need to look. And if they're going to be at South Park too, there's a creative director, and then they hire artists to come on and they say, look, this is how you're going to draw characters and objects for this show. And so the concept applies for your game. If you do some planning up front, you figure out conceptually, what's the story going to be, what's the mood going to be, how is it going to look? Is it going to be like a high saturated cartoony look like World of Warcraft or Overwatch, or is it going to be like a darker look, like I don't know, Dark Souls or something like that? And from there, then you can take that vision, you have something solid to go and say, okay, now I can go hire some artists. At that point, it doesn't even really matter who you hire, as long as they can execute on the vision that's already been created. If they're skilled enough as an artist to emulate and execute a vision, then there you go. You saved money because you can go and you can find artists, and sound designers, level designers as well. You say, hey, look, level designer, here are the art assets. Here's some concepts for the game. You create the level. They can take that and use those things. But all this to say that as an indie game developer, you do need to be able to coordinate. You have to be like a coordinator. It's almost like a hat you need to put on where you're taking multiple different individuals in different fields and bringing them together and getting them to work on your vision.
Yeah, and a lot of people kind of don't really get what a game designer or kind of the job would be, and it's I don't know, it's really interesting because I don't want to get into this too. Another thing, bit of a side note, but if you're interested in this concept,
Hmm.
check out a video by Lindsay Ellis. It's mostly about film, but it's she does loads of amazing videos on breakdowns of mostly film, but like a lot of really interesting looks into a lot of concepts. Like one of them that's really good was in auteur theory. So effectively, if you're talking about what makes Kubrick, like how do we all
Mm.
know his stuff? That like what is it thematically? And the reason I bring it up is, love it or hate it, Peter Molyneux has had a profound effect on the games industry, and his style is very specific. Like he has artists he works with and people that have worked with him on numerous projects across numerous teams, but it's kind of like he may not be physically writing the code, but very clearly his impact is noticed on the team. Otherwise, the games wouldn't feel like the way they do.
Mm.
And the same goes with obviously the more recent craziness with Hideo Kojima. Like there are people who fundamentally take separate ideas and then make something out of it, and that person is wrangling the team together, and that's literally their job, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you think of big studios like Rockstar. All their games have the same look and feel to them. And what's that one? Project Red, the people who created
Oh,
Witcher,
CD Project Red,
CD
yeah.
Project Red. I mean, I'm willing to bet that if you were to look at Witcher and then oh God, I'm terrible with names. I have the worst memory. Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk 2077, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. If you were to take a look at both those games once that game is released, I'm sure you're gonna see similarities, between the art direction and the way the games play and the way they feel. If you're gonna start a, a, a company, a game design, God, I'm struggling with my words here. A game design company, you're gonna have a creative vision, a creative direction, and at the end of the day, the people that work for you, all they're gonna do is execute on that vision, and I think that's something that's important. And as an indie game developer, I think it's also important to create relationships with people, because if you work with the same individuals over and over again, not only are you going to be able to be more effective, but then a style is going to emerge out of that, and that's going to be very helpful, I think, because people are going to be able to recognize that style, just like you see with all these studios.
And honestly, some of them are just like it's a branding thing where you
Mm.
end up liking them for their work. Like
Mhm.
my personal favorite game director is Yoko Taro, and very specifically just because of Nier Automata. Like before that, I hadn't heard of him, but then I went back and I heard about Drakengard and Nier and a few others, and there's just something really compelling about his style, and it's like that's that's the whole auteur thing, you know. Like it's fascinating to see how a single person's vision can sort of meld all of the different concepts together.
Yeah. Yeah. And that vision, it gets created over the course of a long period of time. I think it has to be cultivated, and you can't get there until you start. So that's something to consider.
And mildly to bring it all the way back on track, what I was what I was mentioning with all of this originally is if you're interested in learning some of the more nuanced things that you might not realize is part of your job as a game developer, uh, look out for these things, and there's different resources for them. So, for example, if it's whiteboxing, which is a very tough thing to learn how to do, um, there's Blocktober, and that's sort of a month long thing, very common on Twitter, where people will start posting these gifs and videos and kind of talk through the process of them whiteboxing their levels. There's actually a really big community of Counter Strike level designers that do this,
Mm,
because again, mild detour on the same idea. People think level design is just putting the boxes in place and designing the shape of the level,
mm,
but if you create something like a multiplayer game, there's so many concerns you don't think about. For example, you cannot have a non symmetrical map in a multiplayer game
mm.
because you'll give an unfair advantage to one side. So there is a reason why literally every Counter Strike map, every Overwatch map is conceptually mirrored. It's identical, because if it's not, it just makes the game unfair. And that's just one example. The other thing too is you may think an area looks really cool, but you might have accidentally created a sight line that goes from one end of the map to the other that makes snipers overpowered. And all of a sudden you've ruined the entire balance of the game, because anybody who's playing the game picks sniper, game over. So design, just the white boxing, you're already in a minefield of making sure the mechanics work. Height as well, like depending on the jump height of your character, you have to design the white boxing such that, are the platforms the correct distance apart? Are the obstacles high enough? Are they comfortable to walk? Um, this kind of idea. There's a lot in it. There's a lot in design of just taking some boxes, putting a character controller in it, and making it functional.
Yeah.
And just to answer the comment, CS maps not mirrored. They're not mirrored if you're talking about attack and defense, because then it is actually balanced. It is still balanced because it's balanced for holding a point versus attacking a point. But the point is, it is literally that's my argument. My argument is that depending on the objective of the map, there is design implications in just putting the boxes down. If you're talking about two teams, uh, if you're doing something like, it's hard to describe what I mean, but depending on the map type you're going for, if it's two identical teams attacking the same objective in the middle, it needs to be identical in both sides. It needs to be symmetrical to be fair for that angle. But if it's a case of one team defending versus one team attacking, then obviously there's differences in terms of line of sight. But the point is, there's a lot of consideration in just taking some boxes already and designing that game.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You were talking about like Counter Strike maps or multiplayer maps, and they're like, if you consider open world games, there's a completely different concept of where you position things in the world so that you kind of like hide the seams between different areas. Like, so if you put the player in a valley, like I guess Breath of the Wind. No, Breath of the, what is
Wild.
it?
Damn it, it's wild.
That's what I'm gonna call my MMO. Breath of the Wind. Breath of the Wild. There's a lot of creative level design where you can never really see to the other end of the map. There's always something in the way, whether it be mountains or trees, or they put the player in a valley or something like that, or they make you walk through a really tight valley to get to the big open section of the world. Yeah, so all that to say, there's so many different skills that you don't even think about, like being able to design a map for multiplayer versus the skill of just being able to design a map for like an open world game. And that applies across the board, even like in audio. There's probably so many little niche things to learn and know. And I think, and
Yep.
that kind of goes back to one of the things we'd mentioned in the previous stream. You shouldn't try to make one big project. You should try to make a bunch of small projects. And I think what's valuable in that, not only is it pragmatic because you get to see the whole process, but I think it offers an opportunity for you as an indie game developer to find your style, Find what you like to make. Maybe you're really good at making open world games, or and you just don't know it. And after you create a couple projects, you're gonna find where you're comfortable, where your wheelhouse is, and in that, once you figure that out for yourself, I think it really opens up a world. You might say, "Look, I'm really good at making multiplayer games." That's probably not the case because multiplayer games are hard. So bad example, but let's say you're really good at making platformers. Okay, that you're really good at making like really difficult platformers. You spent a lot of time in the God, I forgot what the game Mario editor. What's that Mario game where you can edit the levels?
I'm gonna stop feeding you games after this one.
Yeah,
Uh,
please do.
Mario Maker is the one I
Mario
keep.
Maker. Let's say you're really good at making at that game, and you've made like a ton of levels that ton of people have played. So you're like, hey, I'm gonna make platformers. That's your wheelhouse, and then from there, you can figure out all the little niche things to learn about making really good platformers. And then, so I think that's a valuable thing to consider that I hadn't really thought about or articulated before. But yeah, I have a terrible memory,
Uh,
by the way.
but yeah, like
I,
the it's starting to get ridiculous. Uh,
I'm
the
drinking coffee here. I'm not. I'm not.
yeah, I'm the one drinking beer. I should be losing my
I
mind
know.
here.
I was just thinking that.
But it's kind of yeah, it really is like there's just so much in it. Like another one, a lot of people might remember this, but Portal One. A lot of people have probably played Portal One. If
Yeah.
we don't even leave the first room, I could talk for 2 hours about the decisions that have been made in that opening room that you don't even consider. Something as simple as the starting room. Uh, you don't really think about it, but they leave you in a room with a little radio and a notepad, and it's arbitrary. It doesn't do anything. You pick it up, you can throw it around. That's not an arbitrary decision. They did that because they wanted to explain to you that you could pick things up without making it a big deal that is that like put a giant message up and say, quick, you can pick things up.
Yeah.
They purposely had an opening portion which has a little bit of opening dialogue and left you something in the room to play with so that there's only a couple of things to click on so you get a sense of learning how to pick things up. If you take too long, they'll give you some hints, but for the most part, that's just there to let you like figure that out by yourself so you get a sense of achievement. Then when the game starts, there's a mirror across from you. Well, I say mirror, but they open a portal and the portal opens across from you so you can see yourself from a side view. And that's not arbitrary either. They specifically picked that angle from that side so that you could see what it's doing. You could see yourself walking and see yourself through the portal, so you'd get a sense of what the portal actually does. And then when you step through it and you start to go around the different areas of the room, you're in that opening box, and they show you the box that from the outside so you can see your own perception based on like even the floor height. They've raised the floor a little bit so that you get a sense of the perception change when you drop down. There's the shapes of the rooms are designed so that your line of sight can only give you a certain amount to focus on at a time. And then just when you turn that first corner, your first problem was the whole button and the box, and they purposely designed that so that there's only one way to solve it at the start, which is the whole button on the box thing. And this comes down to teaching you the mechanics. They didn't want to teach you to pick up the box initially. They're hoping you've figured out that you can pick things up from the previous room, and you've kind of brought that into this one. And there's a whole lot of other stuff, like the right down to the effects of when portals disintegrate and whether or not you can carry the box through the portals. There's very interesting decisions those have been recycled multiple times based on playtesting. Even other stuff, nobody remembers this. In there's a certain point in the game where you have to fling yourself for the first time across a giant gap. There's actually a mark on the floor where the tile is scuffed in a different texture on specifically the spot where you have to place the portal for that first jump. And people don't think about it. And honestly, I didn't see it until someone pointed it out to me, because it's only there to give you a subconscious visual cue to say this is roughly where you need to be. There's so much like, and this is we're still only at the point of and that the fun fact, most people don't know this. Portal was originally a game that was bought by Valve. They didn't make it in house. It was a game called Nabuncular Block. It's a weird name. I forgot that it's Nabuncular Drop. It was such a weird name anyway. But they actually tweaked the game a lot from the original game they bought, which is sort of like grungier looking. For example, you could originally shoot portals through portals, and they
Oh
removed
my
that mechanic
gosh.
because of how confusing it was.
That is
There's just so
confusing.
much. Yeah. Like I could go on for days, and this is purely to say that so much decision making and so much iteration and game design goes into the really dumb things that you don't think about. And we're not even talking about code here. So you can imagine how much we could go into specifics about architecture and design. Um, there's just there's a million things to learn. And so when I say pick a small game, I'm not saying go easy on yourself and pick a small game. I'm saying you will have a very long journey learning how to make a small game.